I hope that you guys are enjoying this conversation half as much as I am, because this has been, this is foundational stuff that
It is.
I don't think that our kids are getting this in any curriculum.
No.
Because you don't even really hear about this much, even within the church, as far as that's concerned. I mean, you do hear
Some of it.
but we haven't really had too many people talking about the Constitution and its importance and following it and so forth for a while. And part of that has to do with the fact that the church is a worldwide church.
Yes.
And the church's goal is to get the gospel to all the nations of the earth. And a lot of the nations of the earth are socialist and communist. So you don't want to basically just, tell them that, we're not going to support that form of government or whatever if we're going to have a missionary program. So I understand what the church's position is on that. They have to make some compromises.
But that does not apply to us in this country, which
Right.
was established by God for a specific purpose. You were talking about...
But by
Go
the way, since you brought that up, and it happens to be the next our next slide here, you have Elder L. Tom Perry, and he gave this talk actually up at BYU, Idaho.
Oh.
In a devotional that was given, and this was actually in 2010. Well, let's see, it was 2010. I had a friend of mine who was a personal friend of L. Tom Perry's, of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And he said, I'd like to give your book to Brother Perry or Elder Perry for Christmas. And that was Christmas of 2010, or excuse me, 2011. So he gave him the book. And then about a month and a half later, in February of 2012, Elder Perry went up to BYU, Idaho, and delivered this amazing speech, which was so powerful that because they don't put this stuff in the Ensign all the time, but basically,
No.
So later that year, and the Ensign came out in December of 2012 on page 29, his speech that he gave up at BYU, Idaho. This is a portion of the speech here.
Okay.
So Lee, I'm not sure if you've seen this before. You may have.
I have not.
But he said, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is truly a worldwide church. So we have to deal with world issues, right? We have to be careful not to be too rah-rah USA kind of thing.
Well,
right?
there's only, 195 countries or something like that?
Yeah, and we're just one of them. He says, nevertheless, it is important to realize that the church could never have become what it is today without the birth of a great nation, the United States of America. And then he goes on to say, the United States is the promised land foretold in the Book of Mormon. Now, that is the most clear statement I've ever heard from any apostle of the Lord of what exactly the promised land is of the Book of Mormon. He didn't say it was the Americas. He didn't say it was, southern Mexico and Guatemala or Canada or any other nation. He says the United States is the promised land that was foretold in the Book of Mormon. It is a place where divine guidance directed inspired men to create the conditions, i.e., the Constitution, necessary for the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is a powerful statement by
like
Elder
President
L.
Benson
Tom Perry.
talking.
It does. And the fact that it made it into the Ensign, it was pretty exciting.
Yes.
That he actually said that. Because this covenant that God made with Abraham, and this is one of my things that I talk about all the time, is this covenant, right? The land, posterity, prosperity, and security, right?
Yeah.
What I found was fascinating, was when I first identified these things, is if you go to the preamble of the Constitution, this is the opening statement, the foreword, if you will, of the Constitution.
Okay.
Guess what's in there? Well, this is what it says. It says, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Incredibly enough, embedded in the abstract, if you will, of the Constitution, it's the preamble portion of it, are all four aspects of the sacred covenant with God, with Abraham. It talked about the land, the nation, the United States of America. It talked about posterity, to secure the blessings for our posterity. It talked about prosperity. It talked about, justice and general welfare, talked about security, talked about the common defense and the domestic tranquility. And they sought these blessings by an ordination. And what is an ordination? It's a covenant. It's a contract between God and man.
Yeah.
It's an ordination is that they sought these blessings by an ordination. Was this document inspired?
Anybody that doesn't, well, people that are not members of the church, and this is one of the things that has bothered me since I was young. How do you teach people who come from a land of poverty, oppression, control, domination by somebody else? How do you teach that person who comes to America that you will now have liberty, opportunity to educate yourself, to learn, to grow, to become?
Mm-hmm.
How do you teach them morality while you do that?
It's very difficult, and just like there was with the children of
It's
Israel.
almost impossible.
Children of Israel coming from Egypt, they had to have everything. They were slaves,
Yes.
but everything had been given to them to live.
Right. Manna, water,
And when they get out in the desert, they're like, Moses, what are we going to do here? It would be better for us to go back to Egypt and be slaves than to starve out here in the desert because we don't know how to do this.
You'd think they would, as slaves, learned it, but they didn't. They were mechanically...
Slaves don't.
No.
And this has been one of the other problems, even with Native American populations and the remnant of the Lamanites today, is that for so many years they have been oppressed. They've been placed on reservations where it's not even possible to grow food enough to support their culture.
They don't
and their
let them grow
civilization.
food.
They won't allow them to do that. So they become more and more dependent upon the government. And over the course of generations, it's actually to the point where many of them feel like this entitlement that they know, the government owes me a car and a house and this and that and food and everything else. It's all supposed to be, just part
Give
of
it to me.
this because they are oppressing me. And to some extent, they're correct because of the fact that they're correct in that they can't provide for themselves because they were put on land that was so poor that they couldn't even do it. But now future generations have been mentally corrupted, if you will, to believe that they are helpless without the government.
Yeah.
That they are this mentality of that I can't do it. It's happening also with many minority groups in the United States. This idea that I'm being oppressed, with racism and this and that, and and sexism and all these other things, that they feel that they can't succeed because of that.
Well, they just
And it's a
removed
mindset.
from them their desire. It's not that anybody has the inability to do something. It's the fact that they will not apply their own desires. They have become so dependent upon an external source that they no longer reason within themselves. I can go out and I can nail a board to another board. I can actually build a house. No, let the government do it. They can't. They cannot. It's almost a quantum leap to go from poverty to independence.
And the more free stuff you get,
the less likely
the
you are
more
to
dependent
succeed.
you become on those who are enabling you to live that way.
That's right.
Which I think is maybe behind some of the problems that we have in our culture with young men never growing up, staying in mom and dad's basement playing video games
Till they're 104.
until they're old enough that they should be having a family and should be taking a wonderful wife and supporting her and having children and supporting the community or supporting the civilization, and instead hiding out in a basement because it's just easier. My
I
parents
don't
will
have to
take
do
care of
anything.
me. I can draw some kind of something from the government, a little stipend from the government. And because I don't have to buy a house or whatever, because I'm living in my parents' house that they worked for and they bought, I'm good. I don't need anything else. Free
that's,
stuff is it's such a horrible, satanic idea.
well, it's interesting. When you go back to the history of our country, go clear back to 1620, Plymouth Rock. Those people got out and they worked their guts out. Over half of them died in the first year.
Yeah.
There were actually, they figure 100 pilgrims.
Yeah.
Including the men that were working, that were sailors.
That survived?
No.
Oh,
That's the total number that arrived. Only 48 survived.
Yeah.
And that's why William, what's his face? Was it Bradshaw? Bradford.
Yeah.
Was issuing 4 ounces of corn to each person per day so that they could survive.
Yeah.
And where did they get the corn?
From the natives, probably.
Well, it's interesting.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Exactly.
That's what's interesting. They found the natives had all died. The vast majority of the natives had died. They figured that over 90% of the Indians on the East Coast had died.
Yeah.
From the time that Columbus landed there until the Pilgrims arrived.
I think actually that may have applied all the way across the Americas, even down into Central and South America.
It may have.
The native populations just were decimated by the
plagues that were brought.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is, what did they leave behind? They had buried large quantities of corn, rice, and beans. Well, rice? Well, it's interesting.
Rice?
Yeah, they had rice. In fact, it's interesting to note that up in the Great Lakes area, the Indians in the early days, before the Americans came, would go out on some of these shallow areas and harvest the rice.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's not well known, but it's still a fact.
Yeah.
It's also a fact that they found sheep bones. Yeah. So before Columbus got
and
here,
goats.
So forth, all these different things were there, but they were decimated through different diseases and stuff. But those things that they had left were what supplied the food for the Pilgrims.
To save the Pilgrims, yeah.
Yeah.
I read one time, I can't remember now what book it was, but they were actually talking about how at some points during that winter, that first winter, after they arrived here, of course, they arrived here too late in the year to get a crop in. So they have to basically make it through the first year. And they also, this would be so hard, they had to keep their seed corn, their seed for the next year. If they eat it to survive now, then they're dead in the water next spring when it comes planting season, where they can plant it and get a harvest and have it multiply.
Mm-hmm.
So you're sitting there looking at this food that you can't touch while you're starving to death. They were down to eating earthworms in some cases.
Well, you know what's funny about this is you go back and study the early Pilgrims and what they did. They landed and they had what they call a united society, where everybody worked together.
Yeah.
And somebody's were saying,
well,
if I don't have to work and I still get it, why should I work? They finally had to stop it and assign them, this is your land to grow what you want.
A stewardship.
And all of a sudden, boom, they survived. And didn't just survive, but they blossomed and grew.
Yeah.
But they went from a society of socialism, that's all it was, just raw communism, to a society of capitalists who cared about one another. And that changed the entire perspective of everybody
look
there.
At how it worked. Yeah, I've heard a couple of like memes or something that's kind of funny. They talk about that. The only problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. Okay. And I'll never forget, who was it? Oh, it was Dinesh D'Souza.
Yeah.
You remember him, right?
Oh, yeah.
So here's a guy who's, I think he was an immigrant as far as I remember.
Well, he came from India. Yeah.
Yeah. And he gave this example of this wagon. He says, basically, whenever you have a population, you have a certain number of people who are pulling the wagon along, and you have a certain number of people who basically are born with infirmities or are old or are sick or have problems. And so you say, well, we don't want to just kill them. We need to love our fellow man. So we're going to put them in the wagon. And so we put them in the wagon, and we're dragging this wagon along. But we have maybe like, out of 100 people, we have like 90 or 95 of them pulling the wagon, and five people are in the wagon. Not a big deal. And then what happens is then government comes along and says, well, we need some of you to work for us. And so you're not
get in the wagon?
You're not actually going to produce anything. Just hop in the wagon. You'll be okay. We'll be fine. So 10 or 15 people jump in the wagon. So we have like 85 or let's say 80 people pulling the wagon, and you have 20 people in the wagon. Well, that's still a doable thing. It's not a big deal. He says, but what happens is over the course of time, the people who are pulling the wagon look back and say, wait a minute, I'm working pretty hard here pulling this wagon. I think maybe I deserve to have a ride in the wagon.
I want to rest.
So they stop working because it's easier to just go sit in the wagon. So now pretty soon you get to the point where you have about 50% of the people are in the wagon and 50% are pulling. The people who are pulling their guts out, but it's becoming more and more difficult to pull this wagon because just the sheer immensity of the weight that they're having to pull along with them.
Uh-huh.
If you think of this as taxes at 10%, 20%, or 50%.
Yeah.
At some point, he says, pretty soon, and Frederick Bastiat, if you know who that is, he wrote this book called The Law. He was a Frenchman. And he looked at the United States system and went, oh my gosh, these guys have figured it out. But basically, but one of the things that he mentioned, he says, if any nation gets to the point where there are more people who
are in the wagon
than are pulling, at some point the wagon's going to stop, and the wheels come off, and the wagon wasn't built to hold that many people, and basically things collapse. And this is what happens, and what has happened historically to every single socialist or communist based system of government. And who gets left holding the bag? The people.
Yeah.
The people. The ones who were pulling the wagon are the ones who basically are come down on the most. They get taxed harder. They say, well, the people sitting in the wagon are saying, hey, what's the matter with you people? Get moving on that. They start cracking the whip. They have the government to enforce their free stuff now.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, you want to call it laziness. The Nephites call it idleness.
The Lord called it idleness.
And it's interesting that idolatry and idleness have such a similar background name.
Yeah. I was going to say one other thing. We're running this thing into the ground, but I love it. But one of the things that I've run into is understanding where people say, well, the Indians gave us our Constitution, or who's John Locke, or who's Frederick Bastiat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's add a few in there. Let's add in William Blackstone.
Yes.
How about Valerius Publius? How about Cicero? Most people don't even know who Valerius Publius was. And yet,
I remember hearing his name. I couldn't tell you what he did.
Okay, well, let me just explain. If you read those 67 letters that were handed out by people called the Federalist Papers.
Yes.
They read them out, wrote them out.
Right here.
Yeah. Well, you'll notice
Hamilton, Madsen, and Jay.
Right.
And you'll notice the Federalist Papers.
The Federalist Papers. You'll notice that every one of them was given the author at the end of it, signed Publius.
Oh.
And so who was Valerius Publius? Well, you have to go back to the 5th century BC to find out who he was. And that's what's interesting as you study the Constitution and where these men got their thoughts, their ideas. Mm-hmm. You find out that they were not just men of God who looked through the scriptures and obtained understanding and a belief in God, but God supplied to them those men who had gone before and created documents. The 4 volumes of Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, there's some pretty heavy reading in there, but they're powerful. And John Locke and Frederick Bastiat are the same way. But Valerius Publius goes back to 500 BC. He was a Roman senator that had been a warrior and fought in Rome's legions and had gained himself notoriety as a man that could get things done. And so he was elected by the people to be in the Senate in the Roman government. And he treated the people, and he had gained quite a bit of wealth just through his own prowess and his own doing.
Yeah.
And so when he got into a point when he was called to the Senate, he's saying, oh, great. So he was going to build himself a big house on a hill that he already owned that was covered with grapes. And so he built this nice big mansion, and all the people are saying, well, good old Valerius, he's up there living off our means. They were complaining, seeing this huge mansion. And Publius was so distraught over being thought as a man that would take advantage of his position, he destroyed his home completely, tore it down, leveled it to the ground, and put grape vineyards back in it. Then he went down into the middle of his constituencies and built a modest little home among those people and continued his writings. That's who Valerius Publius was.
Wow.
And so when the men, when John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and Thomas McKean and these people, when they read, okay, James Madison and Jay, the three Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, who had read extensively, knew who Valerius Publius was. Interestingly enough, the Federalist Papers were written to who? The farmers in New York.
Yeah.
They didn't write it to just professors and college teachers or mathematicians. They weren't writing for high society. They were trying to convince the people that the Constitution was for them, the common people, and signed it Publius. And the people that read those articles knew who Valerius Publius was. You talk to people today, and I don't think there's one in a million that could answer that question. In fact, everybody that's listening to this, everybody that's listening to this podcast will understand who he was.
Yeah.
You read Patrick Henry and these other great patriots and what they were trying to write. Madison was literally the one that kept track of almost everything that was written about the Constitution. He's the one that took copious notes, talked about the different ideas that they came up with and how they would scramble through them and finally say, well, this won't work and this will work. Mm-hmm. So that's why they call Madison the father of the Constitution.
When you go back and you read and you study the history of these great men, I think we actually did we on one of our earlier podcasts, I think we talked about the fate of most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and so forth. But these are some of the books. I haven't had a chance to read all of them. I intend to at some point in time, but some of the ones I've really, this is Nathaniel Philbrick, talking about the Mayflower. I love this series here. This is starting off with the real George Washington.
I've read it.
I see there's some, and when you look at some of the things and people talk about, for example, slavery and so forth, I've got a whole bunch of quotes that Washington.
He was against it.
He was totally against it. But there needed to be a compromise so that the South didn't basically secede from the Union
in the beginning.
So God has his ways of accomplishing things, and sometimes he can't get us people to do it because we have our freedom and our agency to do these things. But over the course of time, he brought men in.
Yes.
In fact, and this is the real Benjamin Franklin right here, the real Thomas Jefferson. These are fabulous books that are about the founding fathers. Most of these men have been horrendously maligned by lying historians and revisionists, basically trying to rewrite the history of the United States. But if we want to just, I like to go to a little bit of a higher authority, if you will, than historians, and that's Joseph Smith, the prophet, in a revelation given to him by the Lord Jesus Christ, in which he says, and this is section 101, verse 80, involving the Constitution. He says, verse 80 says, and for this very purpose have I, now who is it that's talking here?
Jesus Christ.
It's the Lord, right? In the revelation to Joseph Smith. So I is
Christ.
established the constitution of this land by the hands of wise men whom I raised up for this very purpose. This is such a critical scripture, and there are people who do not understand it. I have friends of mine who are native, and they said, well, basically they stole the Constitution from us.
No.
And just like you just explained, the Constitution comes from the greatest minds of many generations and many different people, and some of them actually did include the Native Americans. We had Benjamin Franklin went out and he spent several months actually among the Iroquois Confederacy learning the proper role of government, proper procedures in government. And in fact, this was all written up in a book. I actually have the book over somewhere on my bookshelves here. But anyway, but it's called Gods of War, Gods of Peace. And it was just written in like 2013 or 14 or something like that. But in it, he talks about how Benjamin Franklin went to learn from the Iroquois Confederacy of how they had lived peaceably among each other for centuries. And they basically talked about this Deganawida that had come to them in the past, in the distant past, and taught them proper roles of government and proper procedures and so forth. And it was because of this Deganawida, which we believe to be Jesus Christ, when he came to the Nephites in the Book of Mormon, he taught them these principles of proper governance. And that those things were passed down through the native peoples. And then it ended up getting to Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin Franklin wrote several of his letters about what he learned from the Iroquois Confederacy. And then, yes, was that applied to the Constitution? Yes, they did. They actually, his letters became pretty widely, distributed and so forth amongst the founding fathers, and they did learn a lot. And then you have a guy by the name of Canasatego, who was a Native American.
I know him.
Yeah, Canasatego.
He's kind of like Valerius Publius.
yeah. But it was the founding fathers. They had argued down to a stalemate there in Philadelphia, and they were about to just call it the whole convention, and so forth. And then amazingly, in walks this Native American guy in his full regalia, and he came in and basically and for about, they say for almost an hour, he basically chastised the founding fathers for their lack of understanding of proper procedures in government. And then he proceeded to tell them how they did it and why it worked. And he also told them who it was that taught them. So the native people had a very big role in the government. It's interesting because he was with them for several hours and then he left. They went to go find him again. They couldn't find him. And I'm not sure if it's in this one. I don't think it's in this one, but I want to just share with you. So how important was these founding fathers?
They were important enough that the entire world depended upon them. Yeah.
And when he said that he raised up, he says, because interesting, because I always thought that it was Jefferson and Adams and Franklin and Washington that established the Constitution, but here the Lord's taking cold credit for it,
and he's telling us he takes.
I established, and how did he establish it? Because he raised up men with all of these diverse backgrounds, with an understanding of Publius Maximus.
Valerius Publius.
Valerius Publius, okay. And these writings from the great civilizations of the earth, all of which had fallen. And because of what? Mostly because of greed and because of trying to give out free stuff.
It's interesting that you bring this up because the world at large, who do not understand our Constitution, many countries, I think somebody said there was over 90 countries that have tried to establish our Constitution in theirs, in their country.
Or it's based on it, yeah.
Yeah, it's based on it. But why did they fail? Because the one ingredient that allows this Constitution, our Constitution, to even function, is morality.
Yeah.
It's an understanding that God is in control, not man.
Mm-hmm.
And that when we turn against God, it doesn't matter who's got the Constitution, you fail.
Yep.
And that's why the Nephites were wiped out. I don't even know why we call them Nephites or Lamanites or anything. I call them Lehites because they intermarried so often among them.
They were all from Lehi.
They're all from Lehi.
Right, yeah.
And 90%, it turns out 90% of the Nephites were Lamanites anyway, because they were always starting a war.
They were going back and forth. Yeah, for a while there was no ites.
Yeah.
Right after Christ came. Yeah, but anyway, there was something there I was just really wanting to share with you that I thought was pretty profound, but now I think I've lost it. Yeah.
Oh.
But anyway, no. Anyway, so, but yeah, I was just going to mention that that so vital was the gospel of Jesus Christ coming to America.
Mm-hmm.
And Christ said that he established it for the purpose of bringing forth this Constitution and so forth. So that, and then we had L. Tom Perry basically saying it was only because of the Constitution that the United States was, it prepared a land and a government that would even allow a new religion to be introduced like this.
Yeah, you can even change religions in Europe. They'd just kill you.
Right.
If the Papists weren't killing the Protestants and the Protestants weren't killing the Methodists weren't killing the Papists. Yeah, I mean, it just...
Yeah, it was one eternal round of just war and conflict and so forth. But
under the guise of religion.
Yeah. But it's interesting because because Wilford Woodruff basically had this experience where he was in the St. George Temple. Now, I find it interesting. In fact, I've kind of teased people before, the founding fathers, I didn't realize they were so impatient. Because,
the only way to...
I mean, couldn't they wait for the Salt Lake Temple to be finished up so they kind of go to the flagship, the main temple kind of thing? But no, they had to come. The first temple was built out here in Utah was completed was the St. George Temple. So they came down to the St. George Temple and met with Wilford Woodruff and basically said, "Hey, the temple's been done now for, gosh, I think 90 days. Yeah. Why haven't you done our work for us yet?" It's just like Wilford was like, "Okay, we just barely got the temple finished." I mean, anyway, so it is interesting to see how these people came. Now the St. George Temple is a fascinating thing. I had a friend of mine actually that went up and he was able to get a copy of the St. George Temple Registry. Mm. And this is the temple registry for, you can see it over here on the left-hand page on the right-hand side of that page. It's August 21st, 1870, what is it, 70, I can't remember, it's 4 or 7. Take a look at this. Anyway, whatever. 1877, I think it is. Anyway, and so you have a Thomas McKean. Washington Smith.
Oh.
Was the one that was actually doing the work for them up until that point. And then you have about almost to the bottom of the page here, you have John Daniel Thompson McAllister. And if you take a look on the left-hand side of page 180 here, first person that shows up there is George Washington. Right?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So there's George Washington. It has the when born. It has a date there. I can't quite read it. The county is looks like Washington, possibly. I'm not sure. Let's see. That goes over. He did the work, and he put himself down as a friend of George Washington. Right below him is John Washington, and then Henry Washington. Sir Henry Washington. This is the close-up here, so you can see 22nd of February, 1730. Is that 1732? Is George Washington's birthday, apparently, and Sir Henry Washington. Then you go to the next page. This is page 182 of the St. George Temple Registry. As you start going down through some of those names, you're going to recognize a lot of these, like James Madison, James Monroe. You have... let's see, Zachary Taylor, James Knox Polk. You have John Tyler. And let's see, some of the other ones down here. I mean, it's just amazing to see the names of these people. Here's some of them here. So there's Andrew Jackson. There's Franklin Pierce. Oh, there's an interesting guy. Abraham Lincoln was also one of those. You have, anyway, so as you go through it, but I didn't see, let's see, where is Franklin, Benjamin Franklin? Did you see his name on there somewhere?
No, I can't.
There. No, let's see. That's Benjamin Franklin. Let's see. Franklin Pierce. Anyway, he's on there as well. But Benjamin Franklin. There he is. Okay, this is page 184. And if you take a look at, there it is, Benjamin Franklin, born in Boston, Massachusetts. And interesting, there's Benjamin Rush. Interesting. Look at that.
Do you know what their names mean? I've always gotten a kick out of it. What? George Washington. George means a preparer of the soil, a farmer. John, God is gracious. Benjamin, son of the right hand. Who was the right hand?
That's also the Savior.
Well, it's also George Washington. Francis means a freeman. Elbridge, illustrious. Richard, brave and strong. Samuel, God has heard.
Sure people can hear this. This is awesome.
Josiah, God has healed. I mean, when you go down, I was really curious as to why these men had the names they had. And all of a sudden I realized this is not by coincidence. Wow. God called these men and they were given names that literally foretold or told of the thing that they would do. Just Lyman Hall. Lyman means beloved man. Button, Gwinnett. Gwinnett is the name that they use, and it means holy. You go down this list. William, strong-willed warrior, protector. Abraham, father of a multitude. Gee, I wonder where we heard that before.
Where did that come from?
Well, all I'm trying to say is you're going down these men's names and why they wanted their work done.
Yeah.
They gave to the world, literally, the opportunity to fulfill the covenant of Elijah, of turning the hearts of the fathers to the children to the fathers. Mm-hmm. We keep going back, or we keep speaking of that very point. And I don't mean to head off again back on my dad's books, but
that's what we're talking about today. So do it.
I know, but where you're at is so interesting. but the point was, he was trying to point out that we have the responsibility to not only save them and us, but understand how you save them and us. And if we are not just, if we do not apply the laws of God, yes, we're all going to be resurrected. That's kind of a gimme. Mm-hmm. The Lord took care of that.
Right.
The question becomes, where? Into which kingdom? You're reading those names and their fathers, their children. If you'll notice, if you go down that, you don't just have George Washington. Who else is in there with him? Martha. Custis. Uh-huh. His, George Washington's parents, Martha Custis' parents. We always think of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence. There were over 200 people that appeared to him.
Yeah.
We only
eminent men and women.
Men and women. That's right.
Yeah.
And the women were sealed to their husbands. Mm-hmm. And so
that's another interesting thing. Benjamin Franklin, there were 3 or 4 of them. Washington, Franklin, and I'm trying to think of somebody else that was also that these people had their baptisms done.
Yes.
Right. But then only just a couple of them.
Christopher Columbus.
Oh, Christopher Columbus also, he was one of those that also received the Melchizedek priesthood.
They were given the Melchizedek priesthood and received greater blessings that are not mentioned. There's a 4th one. He was the governor of
who was that? It was
Massachusetts. He was, oh my gosh. Hannah Stoddard can tell you who he is
Yeah.
because it's her 9th great grandfather.
It wasn't John. Oh, that's right. It was he a Stoddard?
No, he wasn't a Stoddard.
No, let's see.
But he was.
I'm trying to remember who that was.
Well, anyway, you talk about those 4 men. You know, they did not appear to Wilford Woodruff and have that done until after he was the prophet in Salt Lake. It didn't happen at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. When these baptisms were done, Brigham Young was the prophet at the time when this was happening. And then we actually found out because I was actually doing a presentation down in St. George, Utah, at the event center down there, and there was I was showing these pages of the founding fathers here, and who had come to Wilford Woodruff, and then there was an interesting thing when I got to when my friend gave me the first copies of this registry. The last page that had the founding fathers and the eminent men of Wilford Woodruff, it had a few more names that were done, on a different day, because they didn't do baptism for the dead every day, so they did it just on
They
occasion.
were still using the temples to do regular baptisms.
Yes,
They
yes.
did not have baptismal fonts in their chapels at that time.
Yeah. And by the way, they're being baptized in the water that actually came up from a spring. It was directly underneath the temple. It's pretty cool. There's another story about that, but basically,
that's where the canon comes in.
Yeah, exactly. Where they pounded the rocks down into it to
pilings
form
down.
the foundations of the St. George Temple. So they had literally living water coming up underneath the temple at the time. All right. Anyways, but basically, so back to this, I noticed there was a couple of Native American names at the end of that. And I was like, so I asked my friend, so what's the deal with these Native American names? They said, well, I don't know. I was just getting the ones with the founding fathers of Wilford Woodruff. And I said, well,
evidently
there's Native American names here too. I said, you didn't get those? He says, no, it wasn't in my scope of what I was doing. So I went down to the church, was it the Family History Center or whatever down there, and was able to get the microfiche that has the St. George Temple registry on it, and found the founding fathers, which is why I have these pictures here. And then I went beyond that, and just the next about 2 or 3 days later, there were a whole group of Native Americans, 85 chiefs from Native American populations, from about 7 or 8 different
Had they
tribes
been baptized for?
that they were baptized for. Oh, you didn't know this?
Keep going.
Okay. I thought maybe you knew this already. But bottom line is there were 85 Native American chieftains from Pocahontas to Powhatan, this guy by the name of Canesatego, and others, and Red Jacket, and Chief,
well, I know Red
Joseph
Jacket,
and so forth. Anyway, there's 85 Native American chieftains that had their work done for them. And many of their names don't show up in any books, so we believe that there's no way that Wilford Woodruff would have known about these guys,
no way,
except for Revelation.
Yes,
especially in St. George, Utah, back in 1877.
Well, they had a voluminous library, I'm sure, on the corner.
Yeah, probably, exactly. So yeah, so but anyway, it's fascinating because one of those. I'm kind of going off a little bit of a tangent here, but basically back in 2008 or 9, I did my first DVD set, right? Book of Mormon Evidence. And in that I talk about this experience from that is talked about in Gods of War, Gods of Peace, this book that came out. And it's not from an LDS author or whatever. It's a historian that's talking about the early part of the United States. And it's in that book that he talks about Benjamin Franklin going to the Iroquois Confederacy and so forth. And it's also in that book that he talks about this guy who comes into the
convention.
Philadelphia in the convention there, and basically explains, calls them to kind of repentance almost, and then basically explains to them stuff and tells them it's this Daganda was the one that told them about it. Anyway, that guy's name was Canesatego. Well,
and he was on that list?
this is the thing that's fascinating. So I found out about this list. I went down there to to do this presentation down in St. George, Utah,
Okay.
and I started showing the pages of the Native Americans, and all of a sudden this lady up in the stands, basically, she literally leaps out of her seat and she points to the screen. She yells out, "Those are my people. That's my people." And I'm like, hold on, lady. Just relax. Okay, it's going to be okay, kind of thing. And then she came up afterwards, and she named her name is Dolores Gagnon, and she lives down there. But she is a pureblood. I'm going to get her tribe wrong, but anyway, she's from the northeastern tribes, and
Algonquin language speaking tribes.
Algonquin speaking group. Yes, I'm sorry, Dolores. If you see this, I'm embarrassed that I don't remember the tribe that you're
Narragansett
part of. But anyway, so, but the bottom line is that so she came up afterwards and she says, "I recognize a lot of those names, but they're not anywhere else in historical books and so forth, right?" So we had the date that they were baptized, and anyway, long story short, basically is that she said, well, she called me up one day and she said, so the founding fathers, it shows the date that they were baptized and also the date that they were, set apart and so forth and had their endowments done.
Yeah.
Where's the dates for the Native Americans? She said, "Didn't you find that?" And I looked. I was like, "Oh, okay. I don't see that. I didn't see it." So I went and checked it out, and sure enough, I couldn't find their date of when their endowments were done.
They hadn't been done.
And then so I called her back and said, "I don't find it." And so she said, "Well, I'm gonna find out. These are my people." So she actually called up and got a hold of the church and said, "Hey, so these baptisms were done, but can you show me where their endowments were done in the St. George Temple?" And they got back with her a couple of weeks later and said, "We've looked through the whole thing and we don't see that they were ever done." And she says, "Well, what is that? What's it going to take to make these things happen? What can we do to get this moving along?" And they said, "Well, are you Native American?" And she says, "Yes, I am. And these are my people." I says, "Well, then submit the names." So she went and spent a whole several weeks in one particular year. And she's done this 2 or 3 times where she went up to her tribes up in Canada, where the tribal headquarters are today for some of these people. And she was able to find out, not only do all these people exist, but she found out the historical information about them, when they lived, when they died, all that kind of stuff.
The relationships to different people.
The relationships and so forth. And she found all this stuff out, and then she basically got it all together, and she brought to one of our conferences, one of our expos, the cards to do all 85 of these Native Americans. Now, some of them have already been done. In fact, some of them have been done multiple times, like Pocahontas was part of it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and she had been done numerous times.
Yeah, but she wasn't one of the chiefs.
Yeah, and Red Jacket and so forth. There was others, anyway, so she found out that several of those had been done, but a lot of them hadn't been done. So she actually, so back in 2009 or 10, I had talked about this Canasatego that did this with the founding fathers. Well, he was on the list. And then she came up to me after the conference. And she says, there's one particular chief that I was going to give out to different people and so forth, and they have a Native American branch down in St. George, and so we wanted to get to have them kind of have first shot at these things. She says, but this one I kept trying to give it out, and I just kept feeling restrained to do it. She said, I had the feeling that you should do his work for him. I said, well, who is it? And she says, I won't tell you. You come down to St. George, meet me at the temple. I'll give you the card. So a couple of weeks later, I arranged to come down to the St. George Temple, and we actually met there at the temple with Dolores Gagnon and Shauna. Oh, good grief. Shauna's such a dear friend. Anyway, whatever.
Love you, Shauna.
Yeah, Shauna's amazing. Anyway, I can't believe it. I'm spacing her name off. Anyway, and when she handed me the card and I looked at it, it was Canasatego. I did his work for him that day. That was April the 6th of 2015.
Wow.
And I have to say, it was an incredible experience. And since that time, the number of Native American names that have been coming forward to have their work done has literally just exploded.
Well, I work in the Manti Temple. We go down and do names, and I cannot believe the number of Indian names that are coming through.
Yeah.
And the first time you see them, you're astonished. Then you are amused because the names are like Running Deer and Pulls Wagon with Teeth or something like that. I mean, they've got these strange names.
Yeah.
And then you realize who they are.
Yeah.
They're not a name that is strange to us.
Yeah.
They are people that are receiving something they have waited who knows how long.
Just like the founding fathers. They couldn't wait till the Salt Lake Temple got finished up. These native chieftains came
early.
to Wilford Woodruff in the St. George Temple to have their work done for them. And since that time, it has exploded. I would actually dare say, that's the first time it actually even occurred to me, that this is part of the blossoming.
Well, you
on
know
both sides of the veil.
You know why their names were not done, though?
Yeah, I do know.
Brigham Young died.
Right then.
And Wilford Woodruff had to go to Salt Lake and couldn't complete them.
That's right. So he had to go up to Salt Lake, and that's what we found out, is that literally that they had just gotten the telegram, apparently, down in St. George, that Brigham Young had just passed away up in Salt Lake. Because of the interesting, succession situation that happened with between Joseph and Brigham Young, a lot of people wanted to be there to, especially specifically, apostles wanted to make sure that they were there for this transition.
Same thing
from
happened
Brigham Young to John Taylor.
Happened between John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff too.
Yes.
Those guys were in hiding half the time, so they couldn't even.
Yeah, they had to hide out. But in this particular case, so the bottom line is that so they left. They literally jumped on their buckboards basically, and headed to Salt Lake. And it was like a month and a half or so before they came back to St. George. And when they did, they had forgotten about these Native Americans. So it was so interesting. But I really believe that these Native chieftains. And I'm taking too much of your time here, but
no, you're not.
But interestingly enough, in the Book of Mormon, the Nephites had so little success going to the Lamanites and preaching the gospel to them when they just went to the people. But when they went to the leaders of the Lamanites, like
Anti-Nephi Lehi, yeah,
like Lamoni and Anti-Nephi Lehi, that kind of thing. When they went to their leaders, and the leaders accepted the gospel, and then
the people
spread it out. Then the people did, and they were some of the most valiant members of the church. Back in that time frame, they refused to take up arms against their brethren, and that's
amazing.
And even that in the Book of Mormon is talked about how they buried their weapons of war. And even today, you have like the Seneca Nation, for example, up in the Iroquois Confederacy. And one of the things they have on their flag, they have this white pine tree. Yes. And underneath it, there's several tomahawks. And it's because of their bearing of the hatchet. In fact, they even had a phrase for that, to bury the hatchet, basically to make peace. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a throwback from their Book of Mormon days.
Isn't it interesting that you look at some of the older films that have been produced, and they talk about the Indians come in, they want to bury the hatchet, and they don't even realize where that comes from.
Yeah. Even the Native people themselves, a lot of times I don't think that they realize that that's a throwback to their Jewish ancestral heritage, and specifically to the Book of Mormon accounts of when they buried their weapons of war.
Well, what's 2,000 years among friends?
Well, especially if you don't have a written account of that, it's just orally passed down. You're gonna lose some of that information. Yeah. So and it's just, we could go on and on about this, but basically it was a fantastic thing. I think that that's the first time I've ever really thought about that maybe that was part of the blossoming, because literally from those 85 Native American chieftains, Dolores Gagnon was able to get access to the tribal records going way back. And I mean, we're talking about literally hundreds of thousands of Native American names have been going through the St. George Temple and temples all over the world with Native Americans' names on them. And that is an interesting thought that could be part of the blossoming that was prophesied about the remnant of the Lamanites, that they would blossom as the rose. And with their chieftains now having full authority, having been given, had their endowments and given their callings and given the priesthood and so forth, on the other side,
they are going to communicate with the people on this side and
that's
say,
right,
get to work.
And it has happened. It's not just that it might happen. It has happened. It is happening now.
Yes.
It's just awesome. Anyway, let's finish up with a couple of things about your dad's work. So in order of how that went. So basically, the Book of Mormon, the Constitution, that wasn't the last one, was it? What was the last one that he did in the book here?
Well, these are not put in there in order.
They're not in order, but
no.
But generally speaking, it was that was kind of
the moral basis was the last one that was printed.
But it was the first one he did.
But it was the one that started in the beginning with, the first one he did
with the man-made
was
law,
the man-made law in a changing world.
And then moral basis.
He did the moral basis, and that covered 35 years of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get the others, many are called, was written to church leaders.
So which was first, the Great and Abominable Church of the Devil or the Constitution book?
The Great and Abominable Church of the Devil was first, and then the Book of Mormon, the Constitution.
So this was the last book.
Yes.
That he did.
In fact, that again was a collection. This was the book. I guess I've said this before. Forgive me for repeating myself, but this was the book that President Benson asked Dad to write.
Yeah.
To finish his writing when he was down in Mexico.
Now, in this book, it actually has a couple of photographs or images of the letters.
Right, but they're not in this book.
So there was a couple of correspondences between President Benson and your father.
A couple would be the most incredible understatement I've ever heard.
Really, there was.
They communicated
like
volumes in letters. Dad's got, but no, we tried to keep those things. A lot of them are very personal. Mm-hmm. Things that Dad and President Benson talked about. So Hance used a few of the ones that were
kind of pertinent.
Not just pertinent, but probably necessary to understand the book. I wish that we had included them in this big book, but we didn't. So if you find a copy of this, the original, you'll find those letters in the back. And it's the same thing with the Great and Abominable Church of the Devil. There's letters.
Here's one of them right here from July 28th of 1976. Dear Verlin, I acknowledge with appreciation your letter of July 24th regarding the two pieces of legislation which you and your associates are supporting. I'm very pleased to note that you feel that what you are proposing, that what you are proposing is supported strongly by the Book of Mormon. I'm a great believer in the Book of Mormon and feel strongly that it was written for our day and time. I have said to many people that a person will come to be better informed regarding what's happening in the world today by reading the Book of Mormon than all the magazines and newspapers combined. My great concern is whether we have time enough through the legislative route and the great lack of support for sound principles to get the job done because of the rate at which the subversive program is closing in on us. I have just listened to 2 tapes from Alan String, the Alan String report, and so forth. Anyway,
that's no longer.
He says, I believe Reed Bankhead and some of the others might join with you, including Cleon Skousen, with whom I discussed the matter, and I hope they might find a use for it, and so forth. Sincerely, with warm regards, Ezra Taft Benson, signed.
Wow.
But you said that he had piles of letters, like hundreds.
Yes.
Wow. That is phenomenal.
No, they were like
This is while before and during his presidency.
before
President
when he was an apostle.
Benson.
When President Benson was an apostle, they were very close to it. They talked a lot about different things.
Okay, so now this was Ezra Taft Benson's book, published in 1969. This one was when?
76.
Okay, so this is just before. So President Benson had written "An Enemy Hath Done This," compiled by Gerald Newquist.
Yes.
And that's where the Newquist breakfast and so forth comes on, before
they go.
general conferences.
That goes back so far. That goes back to the early 50s.
Yeah, I've actually been to that. It's really fascinating to see the people. They always have it before general conference.
Right.
It's like it's 6 o'clock in the morning or something on general conference day.
4.
Is it maybe
4 and 5?
I remember it was early, and they asked me to come and bring some of my books for people to pick up at the Newquist breakfast.
It's interesting. You need to note that the Newquist breakfast, the first time I attended it, it was in a ballroom, and it just was packed.
Yeah.
This last time when I attended it, there might have been 150 people.
That's about what it was when I went.
But
it's been a few years. It's probably been 8 or 9 years since the.
The thing that's happened is
that's by invitation only, isn't it?
It's by invitation only.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to say.
You can't just come to it.
And there's not that many people left that are pushing the understanding of agency. That's the only way I can put it. I don't know what else to say, but when you understand what agency is and how the Lord applies it, then you begin to understand my Father's books. When you understand my Father's books, then you understand why many are called and few are chosen. It's a matter of perception, understanding, and then commitment.
Oh, yeah.
People think about it, but very few commit. And Dad found that out when he was in the state legislature. He could talk to people and get them to understand why they shouldn't vote for this bill, and on and on and on. A few days later, they'd vote for it. He found out that the vast majority of people are like a porcelain egg. The only time they're warm is when somebody's sitting on them.
That's right. A porcelain egg. Okay, there we go. Well, that is fantastic. Well, so kind of to wrap things up here. So we've kind of talked a little bit about the books and so forth. What do you think somebody can gain by reading your father's works?
Boy, the greatest thing they can gain is eternal salvation. The greatest hindrance to them will be if they read it and don't do it, because then they receive the other reward.
Mm-hmm.
Every commandment that's given carries with it a reward or a condemnation.
Yeah.
And the understanding of when you can delegate power and when you can't is one of those things that will change your life and your understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ. You know, we quote all the time from this book, many are called, but few are chosen. Mm-hmm. Let me just continue it. And why are they not chosen? Because their hearts are set so much upon the things of this world and aspire to the honors of men that they do not learn this one lesson. And this is where the confusion comes, because they read this wrong. That the rights of the priesthood are inseparably connected with the powers of heaven, and that the powers of heaven cannot be controlled only upon the principles of righteousness. They read that wrong. They read that and say, cannot be controlled only upon the principles of righteousness. No, it cannot be controlled only upon the principles of righteousness, because the next statement is, they may be conferred upon us. Those principles
it is true.
Can be conferred upon us. It is true. But when they undertake to do what? Gratify their pride, their vain ambitions, or to exercise control, dominion, or compulsion upon the souls of the children of men in any degree of unrighteousness. Amen. To the priesthood or the authority of that land, of that man. Mm-hmm. ere he is aware he is left unto himself to kick against the pricks, to persecute the saints, and to fight against God. Hence, many are called, but few are chosen. When you read that with the emphasis,
that's not just in this life.
No, this is eternity.
That also your
Eternal.
priesthood. Amen to that man's priesthood in the next life.
Yeah,
as well.
Yes.
If they don't figure it out in this life.
Exactly. And Dad's books are all written trying to get people to understand that when you pass laws, when you agree with laws that force people or take away their rights, their liberties, then you have fallen in the category of condemned. Amen to their authority. And it's not just this life, it's for life eternal. And when you begin to recognize how far this goes, when you suddenly say licensing laws, well, just start reading the 10 points of the Communist Manifesto, Satan's version of 10 Commandments, where you take away the rights of people. You enforce government control of transportation, communication, education, and all the other shuns that we shouldn't even be in. When you find out what they are doing to have a graduated income tax, enforced public schools, and all the things that they do. Yeah. Oh, free. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
It sounds free to me with my property tax going to it.
Taxes go.
But
yeah.
the point I'm trying to make is if we as an individual, not just a people, but we as an individual, when we think that we can enforce things like that, stick a gun in your ribs, wear a seatbelt, support my children, educate my family, take care of me in my old age. No, once you've reached that, you're lost.
Yeah.
It's amen. And it's not just in, like you said, in this life. What can they learn from my dad's books? The truths of eternity.
That's well said. That's well said. And in case anybody had any questions about whether Joseph Smith agrees, not necessarily about reading your dad's books. Okay,
I think he would have agreed.
but about the Constitution of the United States that your dad wrote. As far as I know, it's the only book that specifically talks about the Book of Mormon and the Constitution.
I'm not aware of it.
No, in the Prophecies and Promises book that I wrote with Bruce Porter, we talked about a lot about the Constitution in that book because it has to do with the prophecies and promises. But listen to what Joseph Smith had to say in the Kirtland Dedicatory Prayer. This is found in Doctrine and Covenants, section 109, verse 54. He says, "Have mercy, O Lord, upon all the nations of the earth. Have mercy upon the rulers of our land. And may those principles which were so honorably and nobly defended, namely the Constitution of our land, by our fathers, be established forever."
They are eternal truths, eternal principles.
Yep. And this went on with President Harold B. Lee. He says the importance of the United States of America. He says, "I have faith in America. You and I must have faith in America if we understand the teachings of the gospel of Jesus Christ." Now, that's not just being rah-rah USA. That's basically America holds a vital role in God's plan for his children here on the earth.
For the entire world.
Yeah, and it said that the Constitution is for all the world, not just for the United States, but for everyone. This President Harold B. Lee says, "The church is one of the most powerful agencies for good in the world, and we must all sound with one voice. We must tell the world how we feel about this land and this nation." And that's what basically it all comes down to in Genesis chapter 22, verse 18. This was given to Abraham and his posterity, but it's part of the Abrahamic covenant, which that covenant is embedded in the preamble of the Constitution of the United States, with the 4 parts of the covenant and the purpose of the covenant. The entire purpose of this covenant with God, the Abrahamic covenant, has to do with missionary work. He told Abraham, "I'm going to give you special blessings, but in return, I need you to do something for me. I need you to take my gospel
to the world,
all of my other kids here on the earth, all of my other children." And in order to do that, you're going to have a land so you can develop a culture of righteousness. You're going to have posterity because you're going to have to have people touching other people's hearts, right? You're going to have prosperity because it's not cheap to have a powerful missionary force on the world. And you're going to also have to have security because even if you have the first three things, if you were at war, you're still not going to accomplish the missionary work that brings the gospel to all of God's children on the earth. So he said that in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, even with the blessings of the gospel, which are the blessings of life eternal. He said.
And that is so accurate, but add two things to it. When they preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, they are teaching knowledge. They are giving them understanding. They're giving them direction in their lives of where they need to go.
Yeah.
But with that, the hardest part is to understand agency. If you do not understand the principles of the gospel that provide agency for the eternities, the rest of it is useless. Yeah, you'll get the gospel out. You'll teach them the truths. But until they get to the temple, until that knowledge of the temple becomes a part of them, and then they apply it to not only themselves, but to their posterity, and that they have agency is the key that allows them to learn these things. Mm-hmm. But those two particular things, they apply to the world, but they come from the gospel.
Yeah. Would you agree with me, basically, that that this is the problem with Christianity in general? When they try to force people to believe in their particular, like the King of England and so forth, right? I mean, you have the Protestantism and all the other, different sects. They tried to use the government to force people into belief.
Exactly.
Instead of God's plan, which is basically freedom,
you have your agency
to choose, and your agency. And isn't that where Christianity went wrong? To some extent?
But only 180 out. They didn't pull a 360, as one guy said one time.
That's right.
No, yeah. They literally miss the gospel of Jesus Christ. Whether you're talking about the Old Testament, the New Testament, or the modern day Book of Mormon Doctrine and Covenants, all of it is based upon agency. In fact, I guess.
Go ahead. I was going to say, even in the Articles of Faith,
yes,
let them worship how, where, or what they may.
Exactly. But there's a huge problem in the earth today, in the world, even among the church members. We come to earth for three reasons. The first one, everybody knows. Oh, I'm here to get a body.
Get a body.
Get a body.
That's important.
Yeah. How about it's as important as the gospel of Jesus Christ. You've got to get a body.
Yeah.
The third one is the one you talked about before, Adam and Eve. Multiply and replenish the earth. Get with it. But the middle one is the one that hardly anybody knows about and very few people understand, and even fewer of those who understand apply it. And that is to find out who you are. Mm-hmm. In other words, are you a just person? Do you believe in being fair to everybody? In the pre-existence, when we lived in the presence of God the Father, He had all knowledge, past, present, and future. Mm-hmm. It wasn't limited to, this person or that person. No, it was everybody. Mm-hmm. And living in that particular type of a situation, it's really hard to make a wrong decision. In fact, if you made a wrong decision there, you knew exactly what was going to happen. So this 1/3 part that followed Satan, they knew what was going to happen to them, but they figured that if enough of them got together, they could change or sway things. They did not understand the power that God has. He knew the past, the present, and the future. Everybody else gets in line. You're going to go to earth. I'm going to take away this all-powerful knowledge that you live in and cannot deny, and you're going to have to find out who you are. Do you believe in justice, fairness? Do you believe in honesty and integrity? Do you have morals? You're going to have to decide. I'm going to give you your agency down there, and you're going to have that opportunity. It doesn't matter where you're born, to whom you're born, or when you're born. You will be given the light of Christ to know right from wrong. Mm-hmm. Now, how you apply it's up to you. It may be short. You may die as a baby. It may be long. You may live to be 900 years old. But the point is, you will make those decisions. You will decide where you want to be. You will decide who you are. Are you a just person?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have charity? What's the definition of charity? The pure love of God.
Yeah.
What's another word for charity? The atonement.
Mm-hmm.
The atonement was the pure love of Christ being fulfilled and offered to us on a platter.
Yep.
So all of us have a chance to return to Heavenly Father, have the opportunity to do it if we so choose.
Yeah. I think it's kind of a fascinating thing that our plan of salvation is so unique in all the world and all world religions.
Mm-hmm.
I had the opportunity to speak to a group of evangelicals who brought about 30 or 40 kids to Salt Lake City to kind of show them how wrong the church was, basically. And for some reason, they wanted me to come and talk about evidences of the Book of Mormon so they could kind of shoot it down, right?
Right.
Anyway, and we ended up having a really good discussion, but the discussion got onto the plan of salvation. And I think it's fascinating that, that their idea of basically what happens after this life is more or less you go to heaven or hell, right?
Yep.
And hell is this place of eternal burning and torture and pain, and it's just awful, and you just don't want to go there because it's going to be so bad. And when I explain the plan of salvation, basically, because of those who actually chose God's plan in the beginning, they're rewarded. No matter what they do on the earth, Christ will pay for the sins sufficiently that they are going to be able to keep a body.
Resurrected.
They're going to be resurrected. They're going to have salvation in that sense, right? And so there is a blessing from them, no matter what they do on this life. They said the telestial kingdom is so beautiful and so amazing. I think it was Joseph Smith that said that people would probably kill themselves to get there, kind of thing. If they knew how great it was.
Mm-hmm. And that's where they'd go.
yeah. And the terrestrial and the celestial and so forth. And I've often thought, how hard it would be to be Christ and have to judge people and say, okay, you go here, you go here, you go here. You have to go down here and so forth. And I really feel that if you don't know who you are in this life, then you will not be able to know who you're going to be with in the next life. But if you're not comfortable being with celestial people,
you're not going to be there.
You're not going to want to be in the celestial kingdom, because the people who are in the celestial kingdom are living a celestial law. If you don't feel comfortable with that, if you don't want to do that, you still have your agency. You still don't have to live the celestial law even after resurrection, because you can go to the terrestrial or the telestial if you're more comfortable there. I kind of get the impression that maybe it's not so much Christ telling us where you're going to go.
You're going to be deciding where we're going to go.
You're going to stand with Christ. He's going to be standing there beside you on your side as you face the Father with your the events of your life unfolded before you and Heavenly Father.
And no man takes his place.
And Christ will vouch for you. But if you don't want to be in the celestial, if you don't want to live that level of commitment, then you have the opportunity to stand there with Christ and say, and I can just imagine Christ basically saying, so where are you most comfortable? Where would be the best for you? And if you can't stand up and say, I want to be in the celestial kingdom with you and the Father, then I think he said, okay, then you get to go wherever you want to go. But if you haven't lived the celestial law, you can't say, I want to be there. And I think you wouldn't want to be there, because it's going to be like somebody who's living a very high moral life and somebody who's not.
Do you think they have coffee in the celestial kingdom?
I don't know. I hope they have food. I hope they have food in the celestial kingdom too. But anyway, but bottom line is that I think that merciful plan of salvation that we know,
mm-hmm.
so beautiful. When I had several of those young students that came up to me afterwards, said, I've never heard something so beautiful. That basically, you mean we don't just automatically go to hell if we don't make it to heaven? I said, no, Christ paid for that. That's what his atonement and his atoning sacrifice is about.
Well, it's amazing. Like you said, we're the only religion on the face of the earth that give people hope, pure hope.
Yeah.
And if they come to understand the breadth and depth of that hope, then they can strive for a greater glory.
Yeah.
They can they can be resurrected into a kingdom of glory. I don't know of anybody on this earth that really wants to be cast into outer darkness. I mean, if you want to be a son of perdition, more power to you, but I won't join you in that.
Well, I'm going to throw one more this is going to be kind of a curveball. Okay. And that is that we know during the millennium, which is we're basically in it to some extent now. We just haven't had the final hurrah here, and then we move into the millennium. I've had people who said, well, now so you're all about the Constitution and so forth, but actually, the Lord says that the best form of government is a kingship, only if Christ is the king.
That is the single most important part of that statement.
Yeah. So the moral basis of a free society, the Book of Mormon, the Constitution, how relevant do you think that will be? And do you think we'll be living under the Constitution during the millennium? Is that, I guess what I'm saying is that how does this all apply in the next, I would think in the next 30 or 40 years, when we're all living literally in the time frame basically of the 7,000 years?
Well,
how does this play into it?
If I understand Joseph Smith correctly, and if I understand my dad correctly, the Constitution is literally celestial law.
He said established forever.
Yeah. And it is celestial law because you have your agency to act, your liberty, and the knowledge to act. Mm-hmm. And that's the point. Yes, it will be that's what we will live under. Yeah. And we will have to understand that you cannot take away, God will not take away our agency. He cannot take it away. He himself is bound by certain laws that he can't break.
Yeah. Probably set up by the Council of the Gods.
Well, I don't think I was there. I'd like to think I was there, but
Yeah. No, but anyway, so I just think that this is going to be important. It's not just for now. This is an eternal principle. Mm-hmm. And the more that we can do it, that's the other question I was going to ask you. Last one. Do you think that we as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will be able to get ourselves to the point when we establish Zion that we can live the Constitution and the constitutional laws the way that well, I guess we may even be potentially living the law of consecration.
Is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? No. I think that until the members of the church are willing to separate themselves from the web of deceit that surrounds us in our government, until we can separate ourselves from laws that inhibit, destroy, and prefer one person above another. Mm-hmm. No. As long as we think that licensing laws are the best way to go, we're under Satan's control.
Or free education or so many other.
Well, what it is, people can argue with me on that all day long, but I think the Doctrine and Covenants and the Pearl of Great Price and the Book of Mormon are so clear on the matter. They need to argue with God, not with me or with somebody else. Tell them to say, well, God said that he's going to save everybody. God also said that you have to abide by his laws. But his laws weren't told to me. Well, I think you were born with the light of Christ and you know right from wrong. Are you willing to apply the same standard to your fellow men? Will you love your fellow men as God loves you?
Like we're commanded, yeah.
As we're commanded to do. If you won't, if you say, well, no, I think that I have the right to do thus and so to my fellow man, that I'm going to force him to be righteous. Wasn't that the plan that Satan presented? Not one soul shall be lost. All we see it is in microcosm. We see just a little bit of it and we think it's okay. Well, I guess if I swallow a little bit of arsenic every day, I won't die immediately. But the fact of the matter is,
but over the course of time, it's going to affect you.
It's going to kill you.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Until we can separate our whims, our desires, the natural man, until we can pull him out and put God in his place and say, like the Savior did, thy will, not mine, be done.
Yeah.
We won't make it. But we have adopted public schools. Oh, I still remember the battles that we used to have when I was a kid. We would go down and try and pass out pamphlets asking people to stop and think before they raised the taxes so that they could give more schools, so they could give more doctrine, Satan's doctrine. People would tear them up, throw them away, try to drive us off. But we're just saying, just read it. It's not going to hurt you to read about Christ. Oh, no. They weren't going to have it.
And these were LDS people.
These were LDS people.
Yeah.
This happened in Orem, Utah at Lowe's. So I'm just saying that until we can separate ourselves from society, and it's interesting, my father is the only man I've ever heard of that was raised on the Book of Mormon in this dispensation. I'm sure there's others that have had similar opportunities, but he's the only one I know of that was raised literally to drink from the fountain of truth, pure waters that allowed him to understand these principles. Yeah. And that's why his books were written.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, well, we do need to wrap this up. Hey, I just I've come to the realization that we never really even there's still a few things we haven't covered, and we're gonna talk about some of that. I also realized that we didn't really get Brill involved in this whole conversation here today, but
we have sinned.
We have sinned a grievous sin there, Brill. He just came out. He's kind of behind the rock and middle display in here. So
I've been back here, kind of just keeping track of everything. This is like my first day back after being gone forever. So
you've been sick and so forth, but
sick and everything else. So the next one, I've been listening. I've been taking notes.
Okay. Okay. So listen, if you've enjoyed this interview that we've had here with Lee Andersen. I just want to let you know that I think you have accepted to come to the expo and speak coming up this coming April.
Yes.
So that should be fun if you want to see a little bit more of Glenn. I see Glenn.
You can call me Lee.
When I first met him, it was a different name. So he goes by my middle name now. Actually, my middle name is Lee.
I knew that.
Named after Harold B. Lee. My mom was.
I think I was named after Robert E. I don't know.
anyway, but just so you know, I just want to remind everybody that we have these interviews that we're doing here on YouTube. Unfortunately, you have to deal with probably every now and again you have to skip the commercials and so forth in between. That's just kind of the nature of the beast on YouTube. But if you'd like to see presentations without all the commercial interruptions and so forth that go on by YouTube, we invite you to come and be part of our streaming website. We have over 1,700 presentations now. We've had a little bit of a snafu because Vimeo, who is the company that we had all of our videos embedded with, I didn't know that they were actually based out of New York, and they deplatformed us. They didn't like some of the things that we were saying involving everything from education to election interference to this and that and so forth. So they gave us 3 strikes and we were out. So now we've had to revamp. Hopefully by the time this video comes out, we'll have it finished revamping it here. But we want to just let everybody know about the video streaming website where we are faithfully exploring relevant LDS topics of our time. And that includes Book of Mormon, Signs of the Times, Self-Reliance in Health, Science and Religion, and more. So those are all things that are talked about. We have over 1,700 presentations by some 450 different experts in every different field of the Book of Mormon. that we have. So, like if you want to be a part of that and join our streaming our streaming website, it's only like $7.97 a month or something like that on a yearly subscription. So if you want to just click the link down here below. Hopefully, Brill remember to put a link down here so you can just go straight to the streaming website if you want to see commercial free over 1,700 presentations on every field in the Book of Mormon. And last but not least, I'm going to see if I can talk you into coming with me sometime on one of these. But this is we have our Legacy Tours and Travel. In fact, I'm just leaving in a couple of days for the South Pacific Wonders Tour, which is going to be fun down in New Zealand, Australia, and so forth.
I got a cow
in the middle of the winter. But the one that we'd love to let you know about, there's two of them actually, but one of them is called the Sacred Histories American Covenant Tour. That's going to be May 17th to the 30th of this year. So May 17th. So basically the end of May essentially is when this is going to be Sacred Histories American Covenant, where we're going to basically go and do a tour that covers a lot of the, when I say sacred histories, basically we're talking about, this is a tour that is unlike any other tour in the whole world. Basically, we cover everything from Adamic history to actually, Adamic history up until Noah, okay, and so forth. Then we have Jaredite history, the next ones that come out over here. We have Nephite history we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about U.S. history. We're going to be talking about church history, also talking about the history of the Knights Templar and others because Chris Kimball, as our resident she's actually one of the owners of Legacy Tours and Travel, and she is an expert on the posterity of Christ. Interesting stuff. So we're going to be talking about that, going to some of these sacred places. We're going to be going to, talking about Knights Templar and so forth, but we're going to be talking about going to a lot of these early U.S. history sites. We're going to be going to Philadelphia and Boston and some other, other places, but also the birthplace of the church and so forth. And, Book of Mormon and related things. We're going to end the tour basically I think I can't remember if it's going to be Kansas City or if it's going to be in St. Louis. But anyway, it's going to be a fabulous tour. The American Covenant is talking about this covenant that God made, this covenant with America. It's embedded in the Constitution. It was ratified on the day of his inauguration by George Washington in this place in New York. We're going to go to the actual place where
the little chapel.
Well, it's not a little. It's a pretty good sized cathedral. It's the St. Paul Cathedral there in downtown.
Well, it's
New
down
York.
the street from the federal building.
Yes, exactly, exactly. It's small in comparison with the other buildings in the area at the time nowadays, but it wasn't at the time. But it has some fascinating history. It has to do with 9/11. And the place where the covenant was invoked, being the place where the judgment of God for not living up to the covenant, the sign of that revocation of the covenant, actually. Anyway, so if you want to join me and Chris Kimball on the Sacred Histories American Covenant Tour, go to Legacy Tours and Travel and pull that up, and you can check that out. It's going to be awesome. And then also we have we have another tour, the Creation Tour with Russ Barlow, is coming up right after that, or actually before that. So we're actually going to be the beginning of May. So if you want to travel with me for a whole month, the month of May, you're welcome to do that. Just sign up for the Creation and Restoration Tour, where we're going to be going to restoration sites, but also the Creation Museum, Noah's Ark, the Ark Encounter, and all kinds of things showing forth the evidences of the creation as it's given to us through Abraham, Moses, and the temple endowment. So we're going to be talking about those things, and then finally we'll be going to this fall, going to Tunisia, Malta, and southern Italy for a tour that has to do with the Phoenician ship and the Phoenicians, and it has a lot to do with the Book of Mormon, because there was this guy by the name of Mulek that showed up here and became the Mulekites that the Nephites ultimately found. And how did they get here, and who was he, and all that kind of stuff. We're going to be talking about all that kind of stuff, going to Malta, which is an amazing little island, and going to southern Italy. and going to some of the sacred sites there in southern Italy, including going to the temple in Rome.
Wow.
You should come and join us. It would be fantastic. But
I'll have to get my son-in-law to start milking the cow.
That's right. That's right. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a wonderful experience to have you here with us, Lee. I sure appreciate you taking the time
My pleasure.
to come here to do that and risking, getting sick from Brill and so forth. Right, Brill? All right. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate you, and onward and upward.